Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday show with Rachel Starkweather called Curious Crossroads. Today we have a very special guest, Philip Graves, Philip, I've known Philip for years just through Facebook and also some book stuff. And Philip taught a few classes at the Moyer Press, some history classes, which were very well received. But we've never had Philip on the show to just kind of talk about what he does. So, um, Philip, I guess let's start with just you're an astrological librarian. Is that how you see it? Or you also own a secondhand bookshop. So tell us a little bit about what you do in astrology.
Sure. Well, I have built up a library of books on astrology over the course of 30 years since I was a young student. And it's international and it covers books from all time periods with no particular preference for either traditional or modern sources or for either exoteric or esoteric methodologies either. I like to cover a bit of everything. In fact, as much as possible of everything within reason, the ultimate limiting factors being space and the cost of books. So I've now got a very full house because I also house, or have housed for the last several years, the Astrological Association's library, and that was used to be called the Astrological Association of Great Britain, but it's now more international. And their library came to me when the previous librarian retired and downsized her home. So, um, but that's a separate legal entity. So I keep it in a couple of upstairs rooms. It fills about 20 bookcases, and I have rather more space filled downstairs with my expansive collection. So
Wow.
it's a very full house indeed now. That's one thing I do. I also, as you mentioned, I also run a secondhand astrological bookshop, which is something I only started after quitting my regular job a couple of years ago. I realized I had about 300 spares in my collection and that I ought to move them on. And then I thought actually this is going to be quite a useful way to sustain my research work because I'm also an active historian of astrology. So I do research from primary sources and write up lectures and articles in magazines like formerly the Mountain Astrologer and still going the Astrological Journal. And that doesn't really pay much at all. So to finance doing that kind of work, I really need to have other sources of income. And as I have so many books around me and I have knowledge in this specialized area, it just seemed to make sense to branch out into buying and selling secondhand astrology books because I kind of know what they are likely to be worth as a result of having a lot of experience of handling these books over the years. And so I just look for either wholesale collections or bargain price copies that people are just wanting to get rid of quickly, and I will buy them up and wait until I find the right buyer, basically.
Amazing. All right, Rachel, is it your turn?
Sure. With just all of that information, I was just curious, how many bookshelves have you built in your lifetime?
A lot, basically. If you look around me here, this one,
Yeah.
and actually every bookcase in this room I've constructed myself. And this is just one room, obviously. But what I find is that the IKEA bookcases, this Swedish company, they're sometimes called IKEA, but proper pronunciation is IKEA. I know that because I lived in Sweden for a long time. So um, their bookcases with practice are actually dead simple to build.
Yeah.
You just need the experience. And once you've done it a few times, it doesn't take much to get back into it again a year or two later. Just have to read the instructions, and then you find out actually this is the same as before, pretty much. So
Do you usually get the Billy bookcase?
yes, well these are all Billy bookcases. These are the half height ones here, which
Yeah.
I've actually got some of my secondhand stocks in. All the bookcases around the edge in this room actually are filled with parts of the Astrological Association's holdings because I'm upstairs at the moment. So that's part of their archive. But this is part of my shop in the middle. Obviously, in the middle of upstairs floors it's not a good idea to put too much weight on them. Luckily, these have some very solid, really thick wooden joists, so I can just get away with this, but I wouldn't feel safe with a full height one in the middle of the room. It's just not safe upstairs. Downstairs, possibly, but
Yeah.
so overall, well, I basically built all the bookcases that are in this house, and except for a little bit of solid pine shelving and a couple of alcoves, and I think between the Astrological Association's bookcases and my own, there are probably around 75 to 82 bookcases of one kind or another in total in this house now.
You
Wow.
you have a website, AstroLearn, and on there under the images section, you have pictures of before and after. And I thought that was really cool just to see like the spare room and then the room full of books. Those are really cool.
Yes, yes. I can't remember exactly which era those images date from. I put most of the pictures in that part of the site up quite a few years ago. I might put one or two up when I first moved to this new location in 2018 as well, and that might
Yeah.
explain those.
Hmm. Wow, that's so interesting. Okay, so I want to know what in your astrological chart makes you a librarian?
That's a very good question. I mean, I haven't really got a definitive answer to that, but there are certain things which seem to me to be a part of the picture. One is that I have Mercury conjunct Jupiter in the first decan of Pisces in my
On Paul
ninth
Mulholland.
house.
Good.
So it's quite a strong indication in my estimation, though it's not always possible to be completely objective by your own chart, but I personally believe that this is a strong indication of pursuits of the higher mind of one kind or another. It wouldn't necessarily have to be astrology. It could be religion, it could be philosophy. And also, I'm actually very interested in philosophy, and I was into philosophy before I discovered astrology. So that fits as well. I then also have an air sign grand trine between Venus in Aquarius, Uranus in Libra, and Saturn in Gemini. Um, More or less, actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because basically I have Venus at 19 degrees of Aquarius, and I have Uranus at 26 degrees of Libra, and Saturn at 28 degrees of Gemini. So Saturn does not, in terms of very tight orbs, if you only allow, say, an orb of 8 degrees, as some modern astrologers do, for a trine from Saturn to Venus, it would be just out of orb 9 degrees, but possibly in traditional terms, it's actually good enough. So it is a sort of grand trine. And I think that air sign being very focused on the areas that air signs in general being very focused on the domain of the mind and on sort of abstract thought, it's quite a useful thing to have Venus, which is related partly to things one values and enjoys, in a sort of grand trine with Saturn, another air sign, which is a lot about the material world and discipline and solid matter in one kind or another. And then also Uranus, which is partly about sort of unusual and sort of intellectually unorthodox pursuits of one kind or another. So personally, I think that also has a role to play. Finally, I do also have a natal moon sign placement in Taurus, and I've got a Cancer ascendant. And Cancer is quite often strongly marked in people who deal with antiques and really old things. And I think that Moon in Taurus is very often associated with it can be either a strong connection with the earth and the natural world, or it just can be a very strong connection to the physical and material world in one kind or another. So actually my strong preference for physical books in situ over the kind of, the modern habit people have of just making do with digital books. That may come into that. What do you think?
Wow, that's a beautiful analysis. The one comment I have about that is the Uranus in
Yeah,
Libra. What I
yeah.
see with that generation is an excitement through meeting a new person often. So it's like I could see where there's maybe some excitement about meeting a person through purchasing a book, or like it's not just the
Mhm.
book, but it's a whole experience of who you connect and meet through that process. And that might, and then the Saturn in Gemini is very erudite, in the whole. I think that provides like a serious frame of mind about the studies as well. So I think that was just my thoughts. And of course the
Yeah,
Mercury Jupiter in Pisces, amazing. um so
I'm
I
really
like,
curious. What were you going to say, Andre?
I just like that analysis. I like that you know your chart at that level too. Okay.
thank you.
What house system do you use, Philip?
I think that's a good question.
House systems.
Yes, well, I'm a little bit of an agnostic as far as house systems are concerned, and having looked into the multiple types of house system that were used for different purposes by the Hellenistic astrologers, for instance, Helvetius Valens, for instance, used quadrant systems for indications of planetary strength, I believe. And Andre, you're the Valens expert, so correct me if I'm in slightest bit mistaken there. But then he also used whole sign houses for topics.
Hmm. Yeah. It's funny, I translated Valence so long ago that it's like I'm a linguist, and so I
Yeah.
did it mathematically and linguistically, but I'm not an expert like the historians. You guys are really the ones who know the books in and out. I mean, I do remember, it's like, how well do you remember a book you read, 15 years ago? I mean, so in some ways, you probably know more about Valence than I do, oddly.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I haven't studied Valens actually at all since the ancient history class that we did together a couple of years ago. So everything I can say about him is based on what I remember from past study. But no, I do find it really interesting that some of the ancient astrologers used multiple types of house system for different purposes, and that was one of the great discoveries from Project Hindsight, I believe. Carry
Well, I
on.
do remember. I think it's in book four of Valence. He starts chopping up the houses into basically what we see as like Placidus houses, and he was doing it for
Mm.
planetary strength purposes. I do remember that. And I have drawings in the book and stuff. But I do want to say for anyone listening, Philip's lectures from the Wire Press are actually available on my website at the school store. Someone just bought all of your lectures the other day, actually. So if you go to andrewgertz.com and you go to the school store, you can find all of Philip's history lectures, which were amazing. He did all kinds of research, and there's four different time periods he focused in on.
I've
Right. So, okay. So it's my turn to ask a question, right? Last track. Okay. Um, I want to talk to you about the smell of books. Okay, especially with your Taurus moon, right? So,
yeah.
how much of your loving of books, like, do all books smell the same? I mean, they must not. Can you smell them? And what's the deal with that?
They definitely don't all smell the same. I try to focus on the intellectual content. I do like the design values of books that are well produced and that have good quality bindings and nice typography, which sadly seems to be, typography side at least, seems to be all too often lacking in the kind of hyper efficient commercial book production world of today, in which people basically use digital artwork and programs to quickly produce book covers. But I just don't think they're up to scratch in terms of the typography when you compare them with how beautifully it was done in the past. But that's just a kind of personal observation there. In terms of smell, I mean, old books which have any kind of mold will obviously smell musty. And most of the time, it is not visible mold, even. There might be a little bit of foxing inside, which possibly has some kind of mold related component in it. I don't even remember the exact details of what causes foxing. It's related to partly to iron oxidation, but I think some sort of mold-like organism is usually present that actually sets this off as well. But mustiness, that's just very common with old paper of one kind or another. I think that books which are quite new, you will tend to be able to smell the print to some degree. And whether that's on the covers or the actual fresh print itself, just as if you have a laser printer at home, you will almost certainly have noticed that using a laser printer kind of fills the entire room for at least a day or so if you don't open windows with the smell of toner. So the production of print does involve chemical odors of one kind or another, but I don't think that kind of new print smell is particularly healthy or appealing, but it is a byproduct of the print process, so we have to live with it.
Yeah, I particularly asked this one because I figured that old books
Yeah.
had a certain I guess I was kind of wondering too if you've ever had a book arrive and you were like, oh my God, like it just smells, like it's been in an attic, or I know that's kind of a weird question, but sometimes the weird questions uncover interesting answers. So
I can't remember one being so repugnant that I felt I had to get rid of it straight away. But I have had not actually books I've bought, but there have been some donations to the Astrological Association, which I have to manage and catalogue, and any spares that are donated to them that they already have in their library then have to be passed on through an annual sale to members. So I had to look at all of those, and I've had one or two that had been in a garage or something like that and had seriously deep damp problems where you could actually see that bits of the paper had turned black and are obviously very, very badly damaged from severe damp. And I did actually take pictures and run the worst books past the board of the Astrological Association, because I'm not on the board, so I can't take executive decisions about disposal of any of their books, but they just authorized me to throw those 3 out because they were obviously beyond salvation and they were below the minimum standard that would be acceptable even for £1 or 50p to sell at the conference bookstall. So
all right, interesting. Rachel.
I am curious, Philip, what book is on your nightstand right now? What are you currently reading?
currently reading. Just at the moment, I'm between bits of research because I'm doing a book editing project for an astrologer I've worked with before. And for reasons of client confidentiality, I won't name who that is on this live recording. Also, I don't want to jinx anything, obviously, as it's not a published book yet. But so I've been reading his manuscript and very much enjoying that. The last books I actually read for a piece of research were probably when I was working on my early 2 installments of a series of lectures I'm currently giving for the Astrological Association on early developments towards modern psychological astrology. So basically, I have been looking at sources prior to the publication in 1936 of Dane Rudhyar's famous book, The Astrology of Personality, that actually were of a psychological orientation, even though there's this kind of simplified narrative about the origins of modern psychological astrology, which basically says it started with Rudhyar in 1936, which is just not true. And there are all kinds of simplified historical narratives like that. And to explode that, it's really necessary to do a lot of literary research and analysis. So that's what I've been doing with the approval, I'm grateful to say, of the Astrological Association. So the first lecture that went out in March on this theme covered 15 sources from 1863 to 1914. The second, which is due next month in May, will cover another 20 sources from 1915 to 1935. So just to give you an example, really, I usually mainly read books more thoroughly when I'm using them actively in historical research. I don't generally typically just casually read books from cover to cover because I always have something to do.
Mm.
I used to do that more when I was a young student.
Do you miss those days a little?
I mean, I very much enjoyed that time because it
Yeah.
was such a period of discovery and learning. From a simple starting point. I started with a small number of very general books, such as Parker's Astrology, which I bought in early 1996, and then from that summer, I started to buy more specific books on particular topics, and it was just so much fun. Digesting all these ideas and taking my knowledge further. So I was quite a voracious reader for those first couple of years or so in particular, I would say. Then I was diverted for a while by musical interests until I connected with the astrology community online in 2001, and I've never really looked back since then.
Okay, a question I have is, when you were a kid, did
Yeah.
you dream of having a library, or was this part of your visions, or did it just kind of organically happen? Or
It sort of organically happened. And when I was a kid, my parents were relatively unusual in having quite a few books in their house. But it's not so unusual in my family because I'm from a family of writers. My great uncle Robert Graves is the only famous one, but there were others in his generation who were also writers. And then my father was a biographer. So I kind of grew up with a deep respect for authors and the work they do, and also particularly, I suppose, knowing from my father's experience, it's really difficult to make writing pay if you're doing serious works of non-fiction, such as biography. So I have the greatest respect for people who do serious research and writing because it is, generally speaking, a labor of love for the advancement and sharing of knowledge. And people just don't do it for the money because there are better ways to earn money. But then I really, because I loved writing, and I loved writing both novels or short stories for children when I was a child and songs. So I was convinced I was going to be a writer in one way or another. Um, but it wasn't. I mean, we mentioned dreams. I did actually have a dream in very funny circumstances at the age of 21 when I'd started studying astrology, but I hadn't studied it deeply yet. And in fact, pretty much the only books I'd read at that time were Linda Goodman books, which, if you know Linda Goodman, she's a sun sign astrologer only, commercially at least. I mean, she did do other types of astrology in her practice, but she made a lot of money by simplifying astrology with these incredibly exhaustive sun sign portraits, both natal sun sign
I
astrology
love
and
her
sun sign
love side
synastry.
book.
Yeah, no, she was very, very good at what she did, very insightful within that narrow scope. But I had this funny dream when I was about to start studying more serious books after that, around November 1995. And I actually recorded it in my diary. So I've got the proof, date stamped, entry in my diary that I had this dream. That I visited an astrological research center somewhere in the USA, which she was running, according to my dream. And she looked at me in the eyes with this kind of very deep, sort of spiritually aware gaze, quite penetrating. And she told me that her assistant would show me to the bookshop. And he took me to this room where they had a huge number of other books on astrology, which were obviously much more specific than Linda Goodman's books. And basically, the implicit recommendation she made was that I needed to study all these other books as well to study astrology properly. So even though she was a sun sign writer, she didn't want me to stop at that. The weird thing is, and this may be coincidence, of course, but it didn't seem that way to me when I discovered. Back in 1995, I was not on the internet. Virtually nobody was outside the USA. I mean, the USA were kind of pioneers in the internet, but British people weren't until the early 2000s, unless they had a kind of computer-related business. And a few people who had that were on the internet in the late 90s, but not in 1995. So I didn't discover until several years later that Linda actually died within a few weeks of my dream. So it almost felt to me as though, with hindsight, as though I had actually had some sort of communion with her spirit that had somehow picked up, her spirit energy had somehow picked up on the fact that I'd been intensively studying her books, and it was almost willing me to go further. So that is my strange dream.
That is so weird because you're so erudite. Like Linda Goodman's like kind of like a pop astrologer. I mean, I find that amusing.
We have to start somewhere, don't we?
I love her books. They're actually one of the ways I really learned sun signs thoroughly.
Yes.
With Linda Goodman. Yeah.
Wow. I have a question that's a little bit unrelated, but I'm really curious about music and you. And what instruments do you play?
I play keyboard. I also tried to sing my own songs, but that was sort of by accident because I was never a trained singer. And when I was studying music technology in order to perfect my home production techniques, basically, I was sort of thrown together with a random group of other students, and we were told to form a band for a big performance. So, because I'd already written songs, I took some songs along, and it turned out that nobody else in my group could sing, so I had to just do it myself. So I ended up doing kind of combination of singing and rapping, and gradually getting better. But I still wasn't very good. I mean, it would have been better if somebody who was more professional had sung them. But
wait, did you say rapping?
Yeah, it was partly rap. It was I did a mix. I wrote a mixture of songs. Some were love songs, some were sort of protest songs, and I felt with one or two of those that rap just was a good fit for that. So I love all sorts of music.
I think we need a little anthology of Philip Graves songs.
I do have some which were recorded in 2001, which are up on either Reverb Nation or Bandcamp, actually. So, but they're kind of really obscure because they've never been commercially released. So.
And there's another Philip Graves that's actually got a lot of work out there. So I actually tried to find a little bit of music from you, but I couldn't.
Well, there was a writer, I believe, probably one of my great uncles, probably an elder or younger brother of Robert Graves, who was also called Philip, and he wrote various histories of the Great War or something like that, unless that was one of the Charles Graveses. I honestly don't know because I didn't know all those books that well. My father knows them better. I kind of limited myself in terms of looking into the family history. It's not such an Aries thing to do. I don't like to be too, kind of inward looking. I prefer to follow my own path, so to speak.
All right, I'm going to ask. I'm a troublemaker, Philip, so I have to ask a trouble question. Okay, so what is there librarian drama? Like, because librarian seems kind of serious, but I bet come on, is there any librarian drama?
I mean, I don't know enough librarians to be able to evaluate that as a general rule. How do you define librarian drama? Give me some examples of what we would call drama.
Well, I heard you talking at the Astrological Society of Kentucky about having to house your collection and how that was kind of some librarian drama of like, what do I do with these books?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it hasn't always been easy. It wasn't at all compatible, as it turned out, with starting a serious long-term relationship with a Swedish lady who was used to renting apartments in Stockholm, and there's just not the space. So that did turn out to be a little bit problematic, expanding my collection during those years. So I think probably the biggest issue, in fact, on reflection, is if you're doing a private book collection of any kind, and particularly a more serious, larger private library, is keeping that compatible with domestic matters if you're in a relationship. And I wasn't when I started, and then I was, and at first I thought it would be okay, but it wasn't as the collection got larger. So that's just a sort of cautionary tale. I think one needs to find somebody who is very understanding of this kind of level of interest, or it could be read as an unhealthy habit, which it certainly was in the case of the emerging perception of my ex, unfortunately. So that would be your little kind of sort of honest feed of drama, I suppose I could say, from my own life.
So, like, somebody says you have a book addiction, basically.
I mean, that could be one way that people might look at it. The thing was, the unfortunate thing was, I mean, my ex, she was very into astrology at a basic level. She had read Parker's astrology and stuff. She came to the MSN astrology chat room. That's how I met her, because she had questions about astrology because her mother had bought the Swedish translation of Parker's astrology, and she wanted to know more, and she was really curious. And she had a really, really good feeling for the sign energies, and she could cope with the sun signs and the planetary signs to a degree, like the personal planets and the moon. But she liked to keep things in a kind of within certain limits, I suppose, in terms of what was practical and compatible with her habitual lifestyle. And that meant that having more than about 500 books in a small apartment in Sweden was not ideal, and considerably more than that was just too much for her. So she started to actually resent it when I was continuing to develop my collection, even though we had an agreement when I first moved to Stockholm that I would do 50% astrology work and 50% writing with her. So it was as though actually what she really wanted was for me to just focus on the writing and shelve all the astrology stuff. But that wasn't the agreement we had at first. So
it's so interesting because I love putting different narratives on a thing, right?
Yeah.
So if you put the narrative, like the narrative, like if someone's not Indian, because it's funny when you're dating someone, you have to figure out, like, can you live with their cat? You know what I mean? But like for you, it's like, can you live with my 500 books? And it makes me think of life purpose, and how one really beautiful narrative about what you're doing is that this is your life purpose, and this is what we call telos in teleology. And a person's telos is said, it's like their manifested life product, right? And so people's telos is all over their house, right? It's like I've got crochet hooks and yarn all over the place, and I keep buying yarn even though I have yarn, and but that's my thing, right? And your telos is all over. It's all these books. It's like your life, your spirit came down to earth to collect all this stuff. I mean, that's the beautiful narrative of it, is that this is life path and purpose, right? But then when we get into, can someone live with your 500 books? Then it gets into like, this is a problem. And so I think it's interesting to put different narratives on what you do. It's definitely something amazing what you're doing,
Yeah, well, I suppose looking at it on the bright side, with hindsight, the fact that my then Swedish partner decided that it was too much for her and decided that our relationship had to end after 5 years, that has enabled me to create the library, which is now probably up there with the largest ones in the USA, like the AFA library and obviously Jen's Arts library as well now. So, which wouldn't have been possible if I had basically stopped to keep my partner happy, I would have then had a very different destiny. So, that is the brighter way to see it. That perhaps that relationship was incompatible ultimately with my life purpose. Having said that, I still feel a little bit guilty for having had this conflict as somebody who is by nature very idealistic about relationships. I do like to put relationships before anything. And the fact that a feature of my working life that impinged on the home conflicted with that is something I regret. So I have mixed feelings about it to this day, but it is what it is now. Too late to turn back the clock.
It makes me think this is I think it's interesting to juxtapose our personalities, because I'm kind of like wild and you're very like, you seem a lot more mature than I am. But it makes me look like somebody who's got like full body tattoos. It's like once you got that, you really don't unget that. So if somebody like is trying to date you and they're like, but I don't like your full body tattoos, it's like, you might want to bark up a different tree. It's like if someone's like, I don't like your book collection, you're like, I'm covered in my book collection, essentially. Like it's
gone from
okay, Rachel, save me from
no, you've gone from 500 books to 11,000 books.
11,000.
Yes. Well, I mean, I do have approximately that number today, so that's been a long process. Carry on, your question.
It wasn't a question. It was just a mark of like where you were and where you are.
Yeah. Well, 500, that was probably around, 21 and a half years ago. So that's a long time now. And that was in late 2004. I had about 500.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's like you gained 500 books every single year. Ish.
It's probably been, that might be the case on average. It's probably been a lot fewer than that in recent years, but some years have been extraordinarily expensive, either because I happen to have more money that year for some reason or other, such as when my one of my grandmothers died, and all her grandchildren received a little bit of a lump sum a year or so later. So, and that helped with expansion at that time, and also once or twice I've just either purchased or even in one case been donated quite a substantial collection from another source, and that suddenly ups the count by several hundred in one shot. So less any duplicates that then have to be disposed of later, of course. So
interesting. Yeah, sometimes people give me a big box of yarn. I'm like, thank you, but I'm also horrified because I'm like, what am I going to do? And then I have to hoard the yarn, It's like a thing. Yeah. Did you have a question, Rachel, or?
Yeah. I kind of want to go back to the house systems, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I'm 3 degrees Cancer rising, and you are much later in the Cancer rising. And so I was just like, the whole sign versus a different house system would change your chart quite drastically. And I guess I'm kind of curious. Do you see your midheaven? Is it okay if I talk about your chart just a little bit? We did a little.
Sure. I don't have it in front of me, but that's fine.
Well, I mean, your midheaven is it's in Aries.
Yeah,
But
I
if
think
it's
that's right.
in Placidus, it's going to be in the 9th house. But in whole sign, it'll be in the 10th house. I guess I'm just curious about what house system do you like to look at your chart in?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Curiously enough, the first house system beyond equal house, which I started with because that was all you could do with Parker's astrology, they basically taught equal house. It was quite a popular system in the UK still, but I suppose it was partly just to save space in a single large volume. That's why they taught it. But the first one I learned after that was actually the Koch house system. And the reason being that in the summer of 1996, I was able to order the Koch book of tables, and so that then became my standard house system for the next several years until I was on the internet, because I had actually no means of calculating Placidus houses at that point. And then when I got on the internet and I started using the sites like AstroDeemst, obviously, which were already offering free charts in the early 2000s when I was first on the internet, but also there was a couple of free programs that were very popular in the community around then. One was AstroWin, the other had a similar name, Astro something else, but anyway, they were both absolutely free, and you could do quite sophisticated things with them. And so then I began to look at the effect of changing house systems between the different quadrant systems, and I do think I remembered that there were some placements in my chart that were different in Placidus and Koch, but I don't remember offhand which they were because it was so long since I looked at that. I wouldn't say I necessarily prefer Koch. It was just what I started with as a quadrant house system, and it's obviously a lot less time-honored and traditional than Placidus is, so perhaps taking a traditionalist perspective, my preference should be for Placidus of the two. But then I have a lot of time from a rational perspective for the space-based systems like Campanus as well, which seem to me very logical. The one thing I don't like theoretically about Placidus is the fact that it seems to be doing these rather complicated calculations based on time, whereas when I'm looking at the principles of astrology, it seems to me that logically the birth chart should be more about location and space than it is about time, with the proviso that obviously it is based on a specific point in time. But the Placidus calculations, the intermediate casts, require other kinds of time calculation, which do not seem to be rooted in the moment of birth, rather they're projected from that. So that is a theoretical objection I have with Placidus. It's not purely space-based. However, of course, the space-based systems like Campanus and Regiomontanus tend to result in much more uneven distributions of the houses at extreme latitudes, as far as I recall. So in practice, they're not necessarily the most useful at extreme northern latitudes, even if they seem more logical. That's the sort of, resume of my theoretical thoughts.
Yeah. And I know I said midheaven was switching, but really it was thinking of your sun is right by your midheaven and seeing that as a 9th house sun versus a 10th house sun.
Sure.
Yeah, because it would make a lot of sense for it to be a 9th house sun because of the library kind of 9th house feel of that. Like, I think Jen's Art, who I want to know if you're friends with, because she's another librarian. I think she's got her moon or her sun in the 9th. She's got like a 9th third thing going on, and definitely. Are you friends with Jen's Art?
Yes, good friends. Yeah.
Yeah, because do you guys compare libraries?
Oh, we have done, yes. No, I've known her a long time. I've known her since 2012. I met her at the Sophia Centre conference that was held in Bath that summer, when she had started working with Nick Campion as the sub-editor of Culture and Cosmos, his academic journal. So she was getting more closely involved with the Sophia Centre at that time.
So I want to know, if people want to actually buy books from your used bookstore, how do they find you, or is there a catalog of books, or how does that work?
Yes, there is. I mean, the books that are already in my live shop can be found just by going to astrolearn.com/shop.
Astroland?
Learn.
Astrolearn.com, all one word, /shop. And they're then subdivided by category. So there's one category for journals, one for antiquarian books, one for modern English language books, and there are small categories for French and German books as well, and there's even one for Indian books, which actually I think overlaps with the English language books category because they're usually English language books, but they're specifically on Vedic astrology. But that's a very small category. I just happen to have some spares in that area.
Okay, okay. So astrolearn.com, is that your website?
It is, yes.
Okay, okay, interesting. Interesting. So I have a question, which is, would you rather go out for a nice meal or get a new book?
If it was just me, I would not choose to go out to eat a nice meal at all. I never eat out on my own. I basically learnt habits since my student days, which have been very economical living habits. I've never owned a car. I've never rented a car. I basically never go on holidays for pleasure just on my own, or the only times I've really been on holidays have been when I've been when I was with my ex and we travelled to the UK to visit relatives, basically. So, on the whole, left to my own devices, I will just continue my student habits that I got into when I was about 18 to 22. And spend as little as possible on everything except making sure that I can pay the household bills and eat. And beyond that, eat cheaply.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, see what I can afford left over for maintaining the collection, basically.
Interesting. It keeps you from smoking and drinking.
Well, that's one way to look at it. I've never actually been attracted to either of those things. In fact, I can tell you when I was about 20, it was 20, maybe it was 21. Anyway, it was slightly older than that, so it was 22 actually, or 23 even. I did a teaching English as a foreign language course in a coastal resort called Hastings in Sussex in England. And at the end of the course, on the weekend, a lot of the students went out and there was a lot of pressure to drink with them. And just for the social thing, I joined in a bit. And I think I had half a pint of Carlsberg lager and I had a single one of these Jägermeister shots that were going round. And I felt so unwell afterwards that I just felt never again because I felt like neurons in my brain weren't functioning properly, like something was blocked and it was actually making me stupid for the next 24 hours. So I've never really gone out and drunk anything in a pub from that day till this. So if I ever go to a pub socially, I will have a tomato juice, an orange juice, or water, and that's it.
Nice.
And
nice.
I've never smoked, not once. Don't
Nice.
even know how to.
Quite Bright is in the chat, and she's saying she's loving this chat. She would love to watch a conversation with you, me, and Jen Zart.
So who's that, sorry?
Someone named Quite Bright 8799.
Aha, well, thank you very much. I look forward to that when the occasion arises.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, unlike Volker Schendel, I found your website quite easy to navigate. It was very, it made a lot of sense.
Who's Volker Schendel?
Volker Schendel is a senior German astrologer and researcher who has a channel where he interviews both academic historians and astrologers. And he's interviewed a lot of really important people, such as Charles Burnett of the Warburg Institute and Nick Campion. And he honoured me after my book came out last year by adding me to his list of interviewees. He has a manner of being just a little bit pugnacious and critical. Perhaps get a reaction out of people, and because I know he means well, it's okay. I don't mind. As I say, I'm easygoing. So he said that he felt that he parts of my website were difficult to navigate because he didn't understand that when a drop-down menu appears, to get the top level item, you have to click on it directly. And it isn't, you're not just limited to the options in the drop down, which are kind of subsidiary options, but the main thing is to click the top level one, then you get to the main page. And he didn't know how to do that.
So he critiqued you for your website?
Yeah, but he meant well. He meant well. He was really encouraging me just to make it as easy to use as possible. I know he was trying to be helpful. So
yeah.
Oh, so he did something where he kind of was like, I have to take issue with this, and it ended up being a joke, but it was so hard to tell that it was a joke because of his intense tone of voice.
When historians make jokes.
Yeah, well, he did try to find a couple of things to pick me up on in my book, and he said he was very pleased that he'd found one that he could object to. So he said that in one of my essays, I had referred to Johannes Kepler as an amateur astrologer, and he said, "How could you? How could you possibly get this so wrong and call him an amateur astrologer? He was a professional astrologer."
Oh man, I love how Rachel does research before these things. Yeah, she's bringing up all this stuff. Yeah, okay.
I did watch quite a few interviews with you, Philip, and the thing that I found endearing, so very endearing, is just you have this great sense of compassion for all the astrologers throughout time. And like the way that you kind of champion Alan Leo is an example of that, of like actually putting him in context of like what he was actually doing versus just getting the bad rap that he's kind of gotten a little bit more these days.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. Yes, in Alan Leo's case, it's definitely the case that he's become a kind of bogeyman, and particularly for traditional astrologers, but not only for traditional astrologers, also some modern astrologers who feel that he has oversimplified astrology. But actually, according to my research, and I've collected all his books, and I've even seen advertising of his that shows the astrological services he offered. He was a lot more traditional than people make out. He didn't invent sun sign astrology. That's a popular myth. And what's more, the popular myth that he invented sun sign astrology didn't exist in the 20th century. As far as I can tell, nobody ever accused him in the 20th century of inventing sun sign astrology. It's arisen in the 21st century. It's become a kind of Chinese whispers game, that a whole succession of single volume history of astrology books written by either journalists or people who just haven't looked more deeply at the primary sources of astrology from that period have portrayed him as reducing astrology to the sun, or making it such an eminent focus that it effectively set the template for modern sun sign astrology. But it's all nonsense. I mean, sun sign astrology was already going so strong in the USA before Alan Leo's first book, so the timeline just doesn't support this reading at all.
Yeah.
Well, Philip, we have about three minutes, so I did share your classes that people can buy in the chat. So if people want to get Philip's history classes, feel free to go there. But Philip, I want to know, in these last few minutes here, what other services do you offer for work? Because it sounds like you do research or editing, or what else do you do?
Sure. I occasionally, not at the moment, but I do occasionally, as part of research work, I occasionally get commissions from people who need hard to find articles in old magazines, and out of print astrology magazines that are at least sort of 50 years old. And in those cases, I can usually just take pictures of articles. I have to keep within the fair use rules for copyright. And even if somebody hires me as a sort of remote photocopier, I can never copy more than 20% of a book if there's any chance that it's in copyright. And actually, if the author is living, I make a hard and fast rule that I will not take a copy at all, because I'm, particularly as an author from a family of authors, I really put authors' rights first. So if astrologer is living, I will not copy their work without permission, full stop, not even a chapter. But I do get commissions for articles by dead astrologers from the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, things like that. And it's just quite a useful way to provide a service and get a bit of income in. So I do that too.
Okay, interesting.
So you have a bookshop and you
Yeah.
offer editing services and you offer research services.
Yes.
And that's all available on your website, AstroLearn.
It is, that's right, yes.
And it sounds like you do talks as well.
Yes, increasingly. To begin with, I only really wrote essays for publication at first. Then in 2017, I was called for a second time to speak at a conference in Italy. The first time I'd turned it down because I was just about to leave Sweden. I didn't have the time or space to make that conference, but I quite enjoyed that. In fact, I very much enjoyed the experience of being in Perugia with Mescalila, she's called, who had run that conference quite a few years, and lots of Italian astrologers. And so since then, I've done quite a number of lectures, and they've been coming in thick and fast this year. So that's increasingly the case. I would love, ideally, in the future, to have a regular attachment to a teaching school with a larger body of students so that I can make that a kind of regular source of income. It's not something I'm quite ready for just yet because I need to finish up my books for Everlaw Press, which is actually Jen's publishing company. The first one came out last year, but two more are due to be completed, and I need to finish those as my priority this year. So possibly next year I will be in a position to see if there's demand for a teacher of the history of astrology in some aspects, or even doing the occasional class for different schools, whatever the demand is.
Nice. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you here today. I always love talking to you, and it's good to see Rachel meet you as well. So
likewise,
Definitely
and lovely to meet you, Rachel. And it's very good of you to actually take the time to research my chart and pass lectures, which is, it's quite a length to go to. So I really appreciate that too.
I found you to be a profoundly interesting and wonderful human from my research.
So kind of you, thank you. And your buttons are wonderful too. And I would love a full set of your fridge magnets at some point, your astrological ones, that is.
Definitely.
I see a book trade for buttons in the future.
I love that idea.
Sounds a fun thing.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you all. It's great to have another episode of Curious Crossroads, and we will see you later, Philip. And bye, Rachel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.